let's go ahead and move to item 4.6, and then we'll take a small break. I had wanted to brief the board at least on one aspect of our three goals, and then maybe have that turn into a discussion about how we're doing in general. You have in your packet the list of our goals. One was to re-engage with the State Board of Education. Another was to continue and improve our advocacy efforts, and the third goal was to continue our work in the area of veterans affairs. I have made contact regarding the State Board of Education. I've had a couple of exchanges with Mike Kirst, who Chancellor mentioned earlier is the president of the State Board, about re-engaging and moving on with our agreement of last year. The State Board has 8 new members. So, as the Chancellor said, virtually all of the members who were there last time are no longer there. They are in the process of getting to know each other and setting their own agenda. Agenda number 1 seems to be Common Core standards, and they're spending their time on that, as well as dealing with something called the parent trigger, which you may have read about, which is a pretty high-profile issue. So I think they feel at this time, this year is not the year that they could engage with us. I'm disappointed, but understanding as well when you have a complete turnover like this, and they themselves have a bold agenda that they need to stick to. So I do not think a meeting with the State Board this year, anyway, is in the offing. I think it's certainly doable. Next year, I asked Mike to keep me informed if there would be any change of thought. But at this point, it appears we're not going to do that this year. So we may want to think of other things. Or we may want to think of a replacement, or put all of our efforts into our other 2 goals. Second item regarding our Veterans Committee and the work Member Baca and former Member MacDougall have been bringing forth. Obviously, we will need to find a replacement for Member McDonald. I know that Member Baca is still working on that issue, so I think we'll be okay there, and he'll brief you tomorrow on some of the things that he has been doing. So the advocacy, I think we've all been doing. So I just wanted to let the board know about the State Board of Education, encourage any discussion or any comments anybody might want to have about that or any of the other goals right now. Member Ramos.
Thank you. I wanted to say, and obviously I have been out of the loop, so to speak, for the last several meetings, so I'm just getting a sense from my reading of the docket what the goals have been established to be for the coming year. I will say before I get into my substantive comment that I'm deeply disappointed to hear, as you are, the news that the Board of Education leadership has another set of needs right now. I would argue quite the opposite, that it's the perfect time for us to have a conversation with them in light of the fact that they are establishing an agenda, and in the absence of the kind of engagement that we started with them going forward, it's hard to imagine how we may be a part of that agenda. So I find that regrettable. I don't mean to be critical of their leadership. They have their reasons. But more importantly, what I wanted to say about my read as kind of a board member on leave coming back in, is that these are, I think, really appropriate goals, but they're really very not specific. They're very not tangible. Maybe that's by design. Maybe we wanted to have some flexibility and looseness in that, but I'm just wondering, they don't tell me exactly what we're trying to accomplish in these areas. I think it's important to sort of say we want to have a meeting with the Board of Education or a continuing engagement. We want to continue to support veterans. We want to continue to do appropriate advocacy in the centers of gravity that are most important for our work. But to what end? I'm just sort of wondering, can we find a way, and I don't know that we do it in this setting, but, I think perhaps, Chairman, under your leadership, we can work appropriately offline to dig deeper a little bit and sort of eliminate or determine, are there 2 or 3 specific outcomes or achievements we would like to glean and get in each of these areas, as opposed to just sort of looking at it from a procedural standpoint? Outcomes versus procedure.
Yeah, no, I think, I think what you have in there is, a general description. I do, when we had our retreat, I think we did have a
Great.
substantive discussion, and we focused on a couple of specific areas with the State Board of Education around concurrent enrollment. Mm-hmm. What can we do to further that discussion, and career and technical education.
Excellent.
So we were specific in our asks.
I should have never doubted you.
No.
That's all I wanted to know. When I read this, it didn't tell me anything, but that's helpful.
And to be fair, and I agree with you, it's regrettable, and it would have been a good time. But in my exchanges with the State Board, those were the 2 areas that I said, were priorities for us, and based on our last discussion, and the response back was generally, well, we are so focused on our Common Core standards now and other things. These are not; those 2 issues are not at the top of their radar screen.
That's too bad.
That's with the veterans, and I'd ask Member Baca to chime in if he wanted. We were specifically dealing with a couple things. One, a database that we were looking at, and 2, earmarked funding to provide more programmatic options for veterans. Right. So.
Oh, that's really helpful.
It's not reflected.
No, that's very responsive, and I stand corrected.
Member Baca, do you want to?
Well, I was going to discuss this tomorrow. So
okay, that's fine.
I'll leave it tomorrow.
Yeah.
Could be. Member Reed.
One of the thoughts that I had was a sidebar comment that Debbie spoke to at lunch today regarding our communications with our elected officials, and I think that might be something that we could align ourselves with in the way that Henry's suggesting, working with Marlene, that board members could specifically have tasks and line out an agenda that we could better communicate with our assemblymen and women and senators going forward in profiling our systems office in a more positive light. Mm-hmm. And I think that would be something that we'd all enjoy working on.
Okay. Member MacDougall?
Yeah, I'm not sure if the topic right now is discussing of goals, or if you just wanted to put that. Do you want more discussion on what we might focus on, or is that?
I'm open to it, seeing that one of our goals is not likely to come to fruition this year. Okay. So are there other? I asked that it be on the agenda because I mean we've got a lot of time left in this year, and if we know now that we don't have one, is there something else that we might want to focus on as a board?
Well, just to add point of view, I think that the 2 most critical or vulnerable critical issues and the vulnerability of the system that we are here to protect relate to 2 things. One, obviously, is the budget. The other one, I think, is related to the issue of how successful we are with the students who come to us and enroll in our colleges. On the first issue, the issue of budget, what is most obvious in terms of the impact is what Dr. Scott has continued to bring to our attention, and that is the hundreds of thousands of students who are not able to enter our institutions. But what is also taking place is often rather insidious but not seen and I think as a board, we have to try to understand it more fully. And that is the deterioration in the infrastructure of our institutions. And I'm not talking about physical infrastructure. I'm talking about human infrastructure. I'm talking about programs that have been built over decades that work in coordination with one another to support students, et cetera. So I would like to request that perhaps as a board, we begin to increase our capability of drilling down in our understanding of what is happening to the system as a result of these years of budgetary declines. I think that to the extent that we can increase our knowledge and the specificity of our understanding, we are going to be much more effective in our advocacy role that Board Member Reed talked about and that you spoke about as well. But I'm fairly close to the colleges and have been, and yet I don't think I have a good understanding of just what is happening as a result of all this, the lack of funding. So I would make that request for specificity in that area. I think the issue of student success, which I recognize the task force is set up to deal with that specifically, but again, I think that we have to be very concerned about that. One of the pieces of legislation that appears to have been avoided was the one of eliminating the census as the time at which we counted our enrollment and not doing it until the end of the semester. That would have significant ramifications financially upon the system if it was not addressed. And I recognize the task force has a primary responsibility, but I think as a board, given the national focus on this of all the community college organizations, the president, et cetera, we might want to even consider having a little part of each of our meetings looking at what is taking place in this area of student success and how we're increasing the viability of our colleges in this area. So those are two thoughts I have.
You know, I guess one thing on your first point, I think I would have to defer to the chancellor and ask the question, do we have the capacity to do an in-depth depth look at what the past 4 years has meant, you know, on a system-wide basis? Because I hear your question, and it goes to our ability to better inform legislators. As you say, it's one thing to say we've cut classes, there are, you know, we have less students, but without doing a comprehensive study, I don't know how we get at that, so I would.
Well, I want to second some of those thoughtful remarks that Member MacDougall has just said. In fact, I have sometimes used the expression death by 1,000 cuts. Now, I don't know, I did a little research on that, and I don't know whether you know the actually the painful origin of that particular image, but it actually was an ancient Chinese torture that they used, and you can imagine what that finally resulted in. Well, it has been something that's happened to the community colleges the last 3 or 4 years, and here's what's happened. For instance, Tana, it's been the reduction of classified staff.
Absolutely.
And, you know, the classified staff are so significant in terms of the jobs and duties that they've been doing, and yet we have fewer classified staff. We have fewer administrators per 100 students than we had 3 or 4 years ago. We have largely cut part-time faculty, but we have cut some full-time faculty because as the colleges have been faced with these cuts and somebody retires or resigns, There hasn't been any wholesale layoffs, but they've just not replaced those people. And the real infrastructure of student services has been probably the hardest hit of all of the elements of community colleges. Now, there's no way that the community colleges can be quite as effective as they were when they had that infrastructure. So something's happening in our community colleges that is tragic, and it's happening to CSU and UC as well. UC, for the first time, for instance, this year, over half the cost of a student's education is paid for by the student. Wow, that's an interesting. Now, that's not true in the community colleges. Fortunately, we still subsidize a considerable amount of the students' education, but maybe even next year it'll be about 80%, I would say, is subsidized by the state or by other taxes, property taxes as well. So there's something serious happening, and it's not happening dramatically. It's not like maybe if it had been a little more dramatic, if we'd have gone around and closed 5 community colleges, maybe it'd have gotten the attention of the state. But what we did was, rather than closing 5 community colleges, next year we're looking at they're operating at 95% of their capacity at the best, and maybe 90% of their capacity if it's an all-cuts budget. So that's something to think about, and one of the things that they tell us in terms of student success is that if you really want students to succeed, you make it a part of the culture. And that's true at the board level as well as at the faculty level or at any other level. So I think there's some points to be made here. And if the board would either, number one, like speakers who would talk about student success, or would like a report, I'm sure that our good friend back there, Vice Chancellor Perry, could give us a report at our next meeting about what were the counselors' numbers 5 years ago and what they are today, or something like that. In other words, you could probably give us a presentation on, I don't know how to say it, maybe the deterioration of the infrastructure of community colleges. Now, did you know our infrastructure physically hasn't, it's probably been deteriorating in some ways about maintenance, but the one bright spot that's happened is when we got that passed that said that community colleges could fund their facilities with a majority vote. Right. And that meant nearly every community college has been successful, and it's so I go around and you just see huge number of building programs going on in the community college, and that's good. But you can't. Buildings don't educate students; they're just the facility, and you really got to have something there to fill that building with personnel that make an impact. Now, we're doing a lot of things that are trying to make the community colleges more efficient. We're using technology, and we're doing some other things. But college education is a labor-intensive matter. That's just what it is. I mean, it's the interaction. If you got right down to it, it's the interaction between a teacher and a student. Of course, there are administrators and staff members and all the rest that support that. And the facilities are important to that. So we would be happy to inform you about this, what we might say is the deterioration of the infrastructure. And I purposely called a press conference not long ago, and I said the main message I wanted to get out is if we have an all-cuts budget, we will turn away 400,000 students. I didn't do that as a scare tactic. I did it as the truth, because we turned away 140,000 last year. So if we, that ought to awaken the state to say, we don't want to do that. We don't want to lose those people. We don't want to lose It's just economically, we don't want to lose the impact that those educated personnel would have on us. So if that's something that you may want to discuss among yourself, but we'll, within our limited resources, we'll provide you with as much information or with speakers or with whatever else you might want on that subject.
Okay. Member Melamed, then Vice President Terrace.
Oh, well, I am also disappointed about the State Board of Education, but I guess one of the things that we can do is have you continue to speak to their president of their board and just keep in touch. I was kind of thinking in my head, well, would it be a baby step if some of our board members did reach out to their board members and ask to just have a dinner together, depending on where people live, and, you know, just introducing ourselves on an individual basis or groups of two, or just have a sense of where their meetings are, when they are, you know, for us to go. I'm just kind of thinking of different ways. I'm not quite ready to give it up completely, but maybe to do it a little bit different. So that's a thought. And then it is interesting, the second one that we wrote, to pay particular attention to the new governor's administration. You know, well, we got to meet some people today, so that was good, but they weren't in place for many months. So, you know, that's not us, that's just the reality of it. So some of them are a little harder to do, and I would be willing to be a part of those Tuesday afternoon meetings over in the Capitol to meet with legislators. So if we did that regularly, if people are interested or they're interested in certain people meeting certain people, I think that would be very reasonable to start.
Okay.
I think this is really good discussion, and if I recall, on the 2 points, we specifically have talked since last year and actually at our retreat, not only about continuing to develop relationships with the new administration, but with the existing as well. And part of that was having the Tuesday meetings. And so I just think we need to ensure that that's part of our agenda, that we are setting those meetings and we are going over and meeting. And if Vice Chancellor Garcia needs help with that, I'm sure several of the board members would be more than willing to offer help. But I think if we just have those on the agenda set, several people would be able to go to that. And for myself, I mean, it's easy for me because I'm local, but I think it's important that we continue to do that, because when I went through my confirmation, and I know I just heard back from several of you that are going through confirmation, what we keep hearing is we want to talk to you regularly. Don't just come back at time of confirmation. So I really think it's important that we make an extra effort during this time. The other thing regarding student success, this might be a little bit different than what Member MacDougall was talking about, but I know one of the things we did talk about was that at each of our board meetings, talking about student success and keeping that to the forefront and having examples of things that are going right in the system, because so much of the time our discussion is around the things that aren't working properly, that if we could incorporate into our agenda examples of success stories that are happening either with distant learning or some of the other things, you know, basic skills, whatever models are out there that are working, that's also positive. So maybe we can just ensure that we get some of those things on the agenda to bring those forward so we have that discussion.
Good idea.
Member Baca, then Member Izumi.
I just want to add to what Member Melamed was saying about the State Board of Education. And I can see maybe where they don't want to meet with us in mass, a couple, even one time maybe, so that's fine. But I think if there's an opening for next year, maybe use this year as a way of building that agenda and that discussion. And I think that the idea of meeting individually with members in certain parts of the state, I think would drive towards that, and something that I certainly would want us to be able to do.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good idea, and as the Chancellor reported this morning, Sue Boer, they now have an executive director, which helps as well. They've been focusing on that. She is someone I work with closely in the governor's office, so I certainly plan to engage her and a couple of the other members that I know. At the same time, I do want to be respectful, you know, of you know, their chair, and he's got, you know, he's got a huge task ahead of him. And
their issues are our issues.
yeah. So you know, well, I think we can cultivate relationships. That's always a good thing. It doesn't, you know, if we have to veer a little bit, that's okay. We've got a lot on our plate too. Member Izumi.
Oh, and I understand President Him was saying that about their plate being full, especially as new members. But piggybacking on what was said earlier, I was just wondering, I mean, just as we had Superintendent Torlakson come and have a chat with us, maybe it's less cumbersome to have a board-to-board meeting than having just President Kirst come here and chat with us for, an hour.
Sure.
And then maybe have lunch with us. I mean, I think that by itself might be helpful, and maybe have him accompanied by Sue Burr.
Right.
And that would be, I think, in terms of logistics, for his board,
Yeah.
less cumbersome.
Yeah, I'd be happy to make the request.
So, I mean, I think that might, be a good starter for us, so that we don't lose a year not talking to anybody on their board. We could have an official conversation with at least the leadership.
Yeah.
And then we can then start planning for next year.
Okay.
That's a good idea.
Other board member comments?
I just want to make a suggestion. The triple CT, how we do this is that we assign our members, we have the, like our Board of Governors, all of our meetings listed, and we assign, or actually the members get to choose which board meeting they would like to attend, just to have a presence and be there and report back to the triple CT meetings, and that's just to make, be in
Kinda,
contact at their
right.
public meetings.
It's a good
But that's just a
suggestion as
suggestion.
well.
That's how we do it. We have 2 today, so.
It's a good suggestion. Member Baum?
I'll just add, following up on Member MacDougall's suggestion about how we can become even more connected to what's happening about the deterioration of the infrastructure around the state, is make the pitches I've made before, getting us close out of this room and closer to what's happening. It's very helpful when we have the opportunity to go to another campus or find ways to bring the work of our board out into the field. It's been very helpful. It was very instructive to us and informed our discussions about Compton College.
Yeah.
Because we were actually physically there and able to experience that firsthand. And so, to that extent, if we choose to go in that direction, I think we will need to find ways to meet at other places.
Yeah. Okay, so in terms of action here, what I think I heard is that we would like to make a request of the Chancellor to come back to us with a report on the deterioration of the infrastructure over the past 3 or 4 years at our next meeting. That the board would like me to engage again with Mike Kirst and suggest that he and the new executive director attend one of our meetings when they can fit it in. And lastly, that we don't want to lose sight, and I think we started off this year doing really well in terms of having speakers come to us, but in particular to Alice's suggestion, what's working in our system. So I think if we could do that, Chancellor?
Sure.
And meetings.
And the meetings on have Vice Chancellor, work with Vice Chancellor Garcia on setting up advocacy meetings Tuesday afternoons. Okay, and we'll hear from Member Baca tomorrow regarding the veterans. Any other comments? I think it's good to do a review like this and make sure that we're going where we thought we were. So with that, I'm going to call a 10-minute recess.